I used to think the most painful sound in the world was my mother's silence. I was wrong. The most painful sound is her voice, amplified by a microphone, in a room full of people I was desperate to impress. That night, at my father's retirement gala, she didn't just break my heart, she shattered my entire reality. But what my husband did next, that was the part I never saw coming. The humidity in the ballroom was thick enough to choke the life out of the expensive lilies decorating the tables. I adjusted the strap of my silk dress, feeling the sweat prickle at the back of my neck. Beside me, Mark looked like he had stepped off the cover of a magazine, cool, composed, and utterly supportive. He squeezed my hand, his thumb tracing small circles over my knuckles. "Relax, Lily Rose," he whispered, his voice a low hum that usually acted as my anchor. "It's your father's big night. Just smile, nod, and we'll be back home with a bottle of wine before midnight." I tried to breathe. My father was retiring after 40 years as a senior partner at the firm. The room was a sea of navy blazers, pearl necklaces, and the kind of forced laughter that only exists in high-stakes corporate circles. I had spent my entire life trying to be the daughter he deserved, the one who got the grades, the one who married the right man, the one who never caused a scene. My mother, Eleanor, was currently holding court at the center table. She was draped in emerald velvet, her silver hair styled into a crown that looked more like a weapon than an accessory. Every time her eyes drifted toward our table, I felt a familiar coldness settle in my chest. To everyone else, she was a pillar of the community. To me, she was a judge who had never once handed down a not guilty verdict. The dinner service was a blur of clinking silverware and polite small talk. Mark handled the partners with a grace I envied. He was a freelance consultant, or so he told everyone. But he had a way of speaking to CEOs that made them lean in, captivated by his every word. I felt lucky to have him, especially tonight. As the dessert plates were cleared, the lights dimmed, a spotlight hit the podium. My father stood up, looking older than I remembered, his face lined with the exhaustion of 4 decades of legal warfare. He gave a gracious speech, thanking the firm, his mentors, and finally his rock, my mother. The applause was thunderous. Then the MC cleared his throat. "And now, to offer a family tribute, we invite Eleanor to the stage." Mark leaned closer. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. My mother approached the microphone. She looked radiant. She began with anecdotes about their early years, the struggles, the triumphs, the sacrifices. The audience was eating it up. But then her tone shifted. The warmth drained from her voice, replaced by a sharp, clinical edge. "Success," she said, her eyes locking onto mine across the room, "is not just about what you achieve. It's about the legacy you leave behind. And sometimes, despite your best efforts, that legacy is disappointing." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I look at my husband," she continued, "a man of integrity. And then I look at our daughter, Lily Rose, a girl who was given every advantage, every luxury, only to choose a life of mediocrity. A girl who married a man with no pedigree, a man who hides behind consultancy because he lacks the ambition to actually build something. I invited you all here to celebrate my husband's exit from the workforce, but I also wanted to publicly acknowledge the burden of a daughter who simply refuses to live up to the family name." The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of a car crash. People looked down at their plates. My father looked at the floor. I felt like I was underwater, the air being squeezed out of my lungs. I waited for Mark to stand up. I waited for him to grab my hand and lead me out of there. I waited for him to defend our life, our love, our home. But Mark didn't move. He didn't even look at me. He was staring at my mother with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't hurt. It wasn't anger. It was a cold, terrifying smirk. He slowly reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a small, encrypted black phone. He tapped a few keys, and suddenly, the massive projector screen behind my mother, the one meant to show a slideshow of my father's career, flickered to life. "Eleanor," Mark said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I think you've stayed on the stage a little too long. Let's talk about real disappointment." The room didn't just go quiet, it went stagnant. My mother froze, her hands still gripped tightly around the neck of the microphone. The projector screen, which had previously been glowing with a happy retirement graphic, was now filled with lines of scrolling data, bank ledgers, and scanned documents that looked official and terrifying. I stared at Mark. He wasn't the man I had eaten breakfast with this morning. The warmth in his eyes had been replaced by a calculated, predatory gleam. He didn't look like a freelance consultant anymore. He looked like the person who owned the room. "What is this?" my mother hissed into the mic, her voice cracking for the first time in her life. "Lily Rose, tell your husband to sit down." Mark didn't wait for me to speak. He stood up slowly, adjusting his cufflinks. "You spent 30 years calling your daughter a disappointment, Eleanor. You spent tonight dragging her name through the dirt to satisfy your own ego. But while you were busy looking down at her, you forgot to look over your shoulder." He tapped the screen. A document zoomed in. It was a wire transfer, $5 million sent from my father's firm to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The signature at the bottom wasn't my father's. It was Eleanor's. "My name isn't just Mark," he said, walking toward the stage with a confidence that made the security guards hesitate. "And I don't do consulting for small businesses. I'm a senior investigator for the Forensic Audit Division. I've spent the last 3 years tracking the systematic embezzlement of this firm's pension fund." The gasps in the room were audible now. My father collapsed back into his chair, his face turning a ghostly shade of gray. He looked at my mother, his eyes wide with a realization that was breaking his heart in real time. "Mark," I managed to whisper, my voice trembling, "what are you talking about?" He glanced back at me, and for a split second, the coldness softened, but only a fraction. "I'm sorry, Lily Rose. I had to get close. I had to know where the leaks were coming from, but I didn't expect to actually find a wife, and I certainly didn't expect that wife to be the only honest person in this entire twisted family tree." My mother tried to laugh, a shrill, desperate sound. "This is a fabrication. You're a liar. Someone call the police." "The police are already in the lobby, Eleanor," Mark said calmly, "and the FBI is waiting at your townhouse. You see, you thought Lily was the weak link because she chose a quiet life. You thought you could bully her because she has a heart. But her mediocrity, as you called it, was the only thing that kept this family from being investigated sooner. You hid behind her reputation of being unremarkable to mask your own greed." Mark turned back to the audience, to the partners who were now looking at my mother with pure venom. "She didn't just steal from the firm. She stole from the secretaries, the janitors, and the junior associates whose retirements she just gambled away on a Mediterranean lifestyle she thought she was entitled to." My mother looked at me, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. "Lily, tell him to stop this. I'm your mother." I looked at the woman who had spent my childhood telling me I wasn't enough. I looked at the woman who 10 minutes ago tried to ruin my life in front of the most influential people in the city. For the first time in 28 years, the weight of her disapproval didn't feel heavy. It felt pathetic. "You're right, Mother," I said, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I possessed. "And that's the most disappointing thing in this room tonight." Mark stepped onto the stage and took the microphone from her limp hand. He looked at the MC. "I think the tribute is over. We'll take it from here." As if on cue, the double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. 4 men in dark suits entered, moving with a purpose that silenced the remaining murmurs. They didn't go for my father. They went straight for the emerald velvet. But as the handcuffs clicked behind my mother's back, Mark didn't come to me. He stayed on the stage, looking at his phone. The reveal wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. He looked up, his eyes finding mine, and there was a look of profound regret that made my stomach drop. "Lily," he said, not through the microphone this time, but loud enough for me to hear, "there's one more thing you need to see." The room felt like it was tilting. The emerald velvet of my mother's dress was disappearing behind the dark suits of the federal agents. She didn't scream. She just looked hollow, a shell of the woman who had dominated my every thought since I was a child. But Mark's eyes stayed on me. He wasn't celebrating. He looked like a man about to deliver a final, fatal blow to a building that was already on fire. "What about my father?" I asked, my voice barely a thread. Mark tapped the screen again. The scrolling ledgers vanished, replaced by a series of grainier images, security footage from a private bank vault, taken 5 years ago. In the video, a man was hunched over a safety deposit box. He looked younger, stronger, but the profile was unmistakable. It was my father. But he wasn't alone. Standing behind him, leaning against the cold steel of the vault, was Mark. I felt the floor drop out from under me. You knew him? Before us? I didn't just know him, Lily Rose, Mark said, finally stepping down from the stage and walking toward me. The crowd was a blur of shadows. It felt like we were the only two people left in the world. I was his protege. Before I went into federal work, your father took me under his wing at the firm. He was the one who taught me how to find the cracks in the system. He wasn't the victim here. My father finally looked up. The exhaustion I thought I saw earlier wasn't from work. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of a decade of lies. I tried to protect you, Lily, my father whispered, his voice cracking. Your mother, she has a taste for things we couldn't afford. I started it to keep her happy, to keep the family looking the way she wanted it to look. Mark was supposed to help me cover the tracks. But I couldn't do it, Mark interrupted, his gaze never leaving mine. When I saw the scale of what they were doing, how they were draining the futures of thousands of people just to buy emerald dresses and summer homes, I turned. I went to the authorities. I became the mole. He stopped a foot away from me. The firm wanted them both, but I made a deal. I told them I'd give them everything, the accounts, the signatures, the proof, on one condition, that you were kept out of it, completely. I spent 3 years marrying into this family, not just to catch them, but to make sure that when the house blew up, you weren't inside it. You married me for a case? The words tasted like ash. Every I love you, every morning coffee, every whispered secret in the dark. Was it all just a tactic? A way to keep the daughter of the target close? At first, Mark said, his voice dropping to a level only I could hear. Yes, it was an assignment. But then I met the girl who rescued stray cats and spent her weekends teaching statistics to kids who couldn't afford tutors. I met the girl who was so much better than the people who raised her. I didn't just fall for you, Lily Rose. I stayed to save you from them. Behind us, my father stood up. He didn't look at the agents. He didn't look at his wife. He looked at the golden watch on his wrist, the retirement gift from the firm. With a trembling hand, he unlatched it and set it on the table. It's all hollow, Lily, he said, tears finally streaming down his face. Everything we built, it's all gone. As the agents approached him, the reality hit me. My mother was a thief, my father was a fraud, and my husband was a ghost, a man who had built a 3-year life with me on a foundation of surveillance and secrets. I looked at Mark, the man I had shared a bed with this morning. Is any of it real? Your name, your past, the way you look at me? Mark reached out to touch my face, but I flinched. He let his hand drop. My name is Mark. That part was real. And the way I feel about you, that was the only thing that made this job unbearable. The ballroom doors closed as the last of the agents led my parents away. The socialites were scurrying for the exits, terrified of being associated with the scandal. In the middle of the wreckage, I stood alone with the man who had destroyed my family to save my soul. I have a car waiting, Mark said quietly. We can go home. We can talk about everything. Home? I laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. Which home, Mark? The one we lived in, or the one you were monitoring? I turned away from him, walking toward the exit. I didn't need a ride. I didn't need a rock. For the first time in my life, there was no one left to disappoint and no one left to please. But as I reached the doors, I heard his voice one last time. Lily, wait. There's a reason your mother attacked you tonight. It wasn't just ego. She knew the walls were closing in. She was trying to provoke you into taking the fall for one of the accounts. She was going to frame you. I stopped. I didn't turn around. And why are you telling me this now? Because, he said, she's not the only one with a secret left to tell. There's a safe in our basement, not the one you know about, behind the water heater. The code is your birthday. Open it. The cold night air hit my face like a slap as I stepped out of the gala. I didn't take Mark's car. I took a taxi, my mind a chaotic storm of emerald velvet, flashing handcuffs, and the haunting look in Mark's eyes. I reached our house, the house I thought was our sanctuary, and headed straight for the basement. The air downstairs was damp and smelled of old boxes. I moved the heavy water heater cover, my heart hammering against my ribs. There, tucked into the concrete foundation, was a small, sleek, digital keypad. I hesitated. Was this another trap? Another layer of the case? I punched in my birthday. Click. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside wasn't stacks of cash or incriminating files. There was a single, thick, leather-bound journal and a legal envelope addressed to me in my father's elegant, old-fashioned handwriting. I opened the journal first. It wasn't Mark's. It was my father's. But it wasn't a ledger of theft. It was a diary of protection. May 14th. Eleanor found the accounts. She's demanding more. She's threatening to link Lily's name to the shell companies if I don't comply. I have to find a way out. I met a young man today, Mark. He sees what I see. I think he can help me keep her safe. The realization washed over me like ice water. My father hadn't just been a fraud. He had been a hostage to my mother's greed. He had recruited Mark, not just as a protege, but as a guardian. He knew he was going down, and he chose the man who would eventually take him down to be the one to catch me. I opened the envelope. Inside was a deed to a small property in the mountains and a bank draft in my name. Money from my grandfather's estate that my mother had never been able to touch. A shadow moved at the top of the stairs. I didn't jump. I knew the weight of those footsteps. Mark stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the light from the kitchen. He loved you, Lily Rose, more than he loved his own freedom. He knew Eleanor would destroy you to save herself, so he gave me the evidence I needed to bury her, knowing it would bury him too. I stood up, clutching the journal. And you? Were you just following his orders? Mark walked down the steps, stopping just at the edge of the shadows. I followed the evidence for the bureau. But I followed you because for the first time in my life, I found something worth more than a conviction. He held out a small, plain silver key. This is for the property in the mountains. Your father wanted you to have a place where no one knew your name as the daughter of Eleanor. A place to start over. I looked at the key, then at the man who had lived a double life just to ensure I had a single honest one. The betrayal was still there. The lies were a jagged pill to swallow. But beneath it was a truth I couldn't ignore. He had dismantled my world to keep the ceiling from falling on my head. I'm leaving, Mark, I said, my voice steady. I need to find out who Lily Rose is when she's not a daughter, a wife, or a disappointment. Mark nodded, a pained smile touching his lips. I figured you'd say that. That's why I already put your bags in the car. Not my car, yours. As I walked past him, I paused. I didn't forgive him. Not yet. But I touched his arm, a brief acknowledgement of the man who had played the villain to be my secret hero. I drove through the night, leaving the Lilycom stories of my past behind. The rearview mirror showed the city lights fading into the distance. For the first time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full of possibility. End question. If you found out your entire life was a lie built to protect you, would you stay with the person who kept the secret, or walk away forever? Thanks for listening to this journey of betrayal and truth. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and join our community for more deep, realistic tales. Until next time, stay calm and stay strong.